In April 1994, 80 endurance athletes stood at the starting line of Marathon des Sables, a 6-day, 155-mile ultramarathon through the unforgiving Sahara Desert. Among them was 38-year-old Mauro Prosperi, a former Olympic pentathlete and police officer who had already signed a waiver indicating where he should be buried if he died. A grim prerequisite for this race. Minimal route markings and vast shifting dunes often leave runners completely isolated. By the fourth day, Mauro was in fourth place overall, proving his exceptional stamina and will. But on this afternoon, as the temperature soared to 115 degrees under a scorching sun, Mauro's fate took a terrible turn. A wall of darkening haze appeared on the horizon and grew with alarming speed. Wind began whipping sand into the air, stinging Mauro's face like a swarm of needles. Within minutes, a full-fledged sandstorm engulfed the race, obliterating the trail and the world around the runners in a blinding brown-orange fury. Most of the runners halted and took shelter, waiting for assistance. But Mauro made a bold decision to secure the lead. He pulled his scarf over his face, eyes burning, and kept running blindly for an entire 8-hour storm. The gale roared, dunes shifted and swelled, and all sense of direction vanished in the chaos. When the storm finally passed, an eerie calm fell at nightfall. Mauro slowed to a stop. As he climbed a dune to gather his bearings, an unsettling silence surrounded him. The other runners, the marked course, all had disappeared. Mauro Prosperi was completely alone, lost in the vast Sahara. In the dark desert night, Mauro wrapped himself in his thin sleeping bag and huddled behind a scrubby bush for minimal shelter. He had 2 nearly full water bottles, a compass, a pocket knife, a small emergency kit, a single flare, a sleeping bag, and some dehydrated food. Only what he was carrying during the race. Mauro's survival training kicked in. Although he hoped a search party would locate him quickly, he had to ration every resource and prepare for the worst. Through the night and into the dawn, he forced himself to sip sparingly from his water and eat tiny bits of his rations. He even urinated into an empty water bottle and saved it for when his water ran out. To conserve the precious clean water for drinking, he used some urine to moisten and cook his freeze-dried food. At dawn, he licked dew off rocks, and every drop counted. Mauro pressed on, walking during the cooler morning. Despite exhaustion, he kept a steady pace, hoping to stumble back into a race route or find help. Suddenly, the buzz of a helicopter broke the silence. Mauro's heart leapt as he spotted it in the distance. Finally, he grabbed the flare from his pack, ignited it, and waved it desperately. A red plume of smoke cut into the sky, but the helicopter drone passed, disappearing without noticing the lone runner below. Mauro's flare fizzled out, and with it, his first hope of rescue was dashed. On the 3rd day of wandering, he stumbled upon a small stone building that seemed to rise out of nowhere, an old Muslim shrine used by nomads as shelter. Grateful for any refuge, Mauro crawled inside the abandoned shrine, finding cool shade from the blistering sun. He discovered dusty prayer rugs, a few empty water vessels, and even a tomb with a mummified holy man in a coffin. A morbid companion, but at least Mauro was not under the open sky now. Here he decided to rest and gather strength, praying someone would find him. Mauro even climbed onto the roof of the shrine and planted a small Italian flag from his pack high on the stone wall, hoping it would catch the eye of a search party from miles away. As he secured the flag, he noticed a fluttering in the darkness of the shrine rafters. A colony of tiny bats roosting in the tower. Starving and on the edge of collapse, Mauro resorted to desperate survival measures. There were so many bats, he was able to reach out and grab them. And using his pocket knife, he did the unthinkable. He cut off their heads and drank their blood, squeezing and sucking out every drop of liquid and nutrition he could. It was horrifying, but it had become Mauro's only chance to stay alive. He also scavenged whatever creatures he could find around the shrine. Beetles, lizards, bird eggs, eating them raw or barely cooked on his little stove to conserve their fluids. Still, Mauro's body was drying out as his efforts only worked to slow the stages of dehydration. On the 8th day since the sandstorm, Mauro was delirious and barely keeping himself from collapsing. Stumbling through a dry riverbend, he noticed something strange on the ground. Moist mud. He followed the damp path with desperate hope until he spotted it. Water, shimmering in a rocky hollow. Mauro's luck had taken an incredible turn, and he stumbled forward and plunged his face into an oasis, gulping frantically. His body betrayed him, his parched throat too swollen to swallow. The precious water came back up immediately. Fighting the maddening urge to guzzle, Mauro disciplined himself to take only tiny sips minutes apart, patiently coaxing his shrunken stomach back to life. The next morning, Mauro noticed signs of hope not far from the waterhole. Goat droppings on the sand. They were fresh. Where there were goats, there were usually people. Mauro traced the droppings like a tracker, trudging over the dunes. Soon, he spotted clear footprints in the sand. Human footprints. His heart pounded as he followed them to the top of a small dune, and in the distance, he saw a young Tuareg girl tending a flock of goats in a sparse scrubland. She was the first person he had seen in over a week. Mauro waved and staggered toward her, calling out with what little voice he had left. The girl gasped, eyes wide with fear, and ran screaming toward her encampment. Cresting the next dune, Mauro saw a large Berber tent not far away. The girl's family must have been there. He approached cautiously this time. A group of nomadic Tuareg women emerged, alerted by the girl's cries. They hurried to Mauro's side as he dropped to his knees. Gently, they helped the exhausted runner into the shade of their tent. The women offered him a cup of sweet mint tea and goat's milk, understanding that water alone might shock his system. Mauro's eyes filled with grateful tears as he sipped the life-saving fluids. His body, still fragile, rejected solid foods. When they tried to feed him a bit of porridge, he immediately vomited, so they stuck to liquids. Though he could not understand their language, Mauro felt their compassion in their voices as they tended to him. After giving him some time to recover, the Tuareg nomads knew they had to get this poor lost man to proper help. They hoisted Mauro onto a camel, and a couple of the men traveled with him for several hours across the dunes to the nearest village with a military outpost. There, they handed over the half-conscious Italian to the local military police. At first, the officers were bewildered and suspicious. This gaunt, sun-scorched foreigner had appeared from the Algerian desert. Could he be a spy? Mauro was too weak to explain much. The police blindfolded him as a precaution and brought him to a military base. It did not take long, however, for news to spread that a missing Marathon des Sables runner, presumed dead, had been found alive. Mauro Prosperi's 10-day nightmare was finally over. He was saved. Mauro was transported to a hospital in Tindouf, near the border of Algeria, Western Sahara, and Morocco. When doctors examined him, they were stunned by what they saw. Mauro had wandered roughly 180 miles off course, crossing from Morocco deep into Algeria. In the process, he had lost around 35 pounds of body weight, dropping from a fit athletic build to just 40 kilograms. He was severely dehydrated and battered by the elements. His liver and kidneys had taken damage from the ordeal, and his stomach had shrunken. For months after, he was only able to handle broth and liquid meals. It would end up taking him nearly 2 years to fully recover his health. When Mauro's wife was contacted, she broke down in tears. She had already accepted that he was likely gone forever. Instead, incredibly, her husband had essentially come back from the dead. News of Mauro Prosperi's survival spread quickly, and upon his return to Italy, he was welcomed as a hero. In the press, he was hailed as the Robinson Crusoe of the Sahara, the man who had defied death alone in the desert. Despite the traumatic experience, Mauro was not one to stand down from a challenge. He still needed to complete the Marathon des Sables. In fact, a mere 4 years later, he returned to Morocco to face the race again, the event that had nearly taken his life. This time, he finished successfully, conquering the course that had left him lost in 1994. And in the years since, Mauro has completed in over 8 more desert ultramarathons, refusing to let his harrowing experience deter him. Race organizers, prompted by Mauro's incident, improved safety protocols. Today, runners carry heavy-duty flares and emergency trackers to prevent similar incidences from occurring.